everybody to this session. This one is particularly for my Form 6 students, my A-level students who are going to be looking at the study of Stanislavski. One of those names that you have to know when you are into drama, when you're into theater, when you are into the performing arts. So this, of course, is part of our Module 2 syllabus where we are looking at forming the performer. So we're just going to cover the basis of Stanislavski before we move into rehearsals and see how we are going to implement his theories and his tenets into our own work in devising performances. So who are we talking about? This lovely little complicated Russian name, Konstantin Stanislavski, was a Russian drama theorist. And as I said, he's one of those names that you have to know. He's probably the most famous of them all, who came up with a method, also known as the Stanislavski system, of training for actors to produce more believable performances, more natural performances. So if you think about what a system is, a system by definition is a larger entity that is made up of smaller elements. So the system itself is this larger entity of, theories about how acting and performances should be delivered, and then it's broken up into smaller elements, smaller exercises, smaller goals that the performers can work towards in order to produce the best performances that they can, or at least according to how Stanislavski believes they should be. So his notes on the method were made up a series of books, building a character, an actor prepares, and creating a role. So let's learn a bit about the work that Stanislavski did and how he came up with these theories. So now, first of all, he was big on realism. Realism was a theatrical movement, just as you have modernism, you have romanticism, you have the Gothic era, you have the medieval era, you have the Elizabethan, you have all of these eras and these shifts in how things are written and how things are performed, and as well as how society was developed. And this is a very Western, very Eurocentric focus that we have here. But realism in this context is looking at a theatrical movement where prior to this, in 19th century Russia, the actors had a very grandiose tone and it was very romantic. They used a lot of over-the-top gestures. And then people like Stanislavski and also people like the famous playwright Anton Chekhov now decided that, life is hard. Life is difficult and things are changing. We have industries developing and we have the working class being expanded, and people are really struggling, and we don't want to hear about royalty anymore. We want to hear about ordinary people. We want to see ordinary struggles, and we want to see them and feel them and really be able to empathize with them. So Stanislavski was a huge proponent of this. So with the method now, the actors will try to immerse themselves in a character as much as possible by using real emotions and past experiences. And they use the imagination to basically get into the mind of the character and adopt the emotions that the character would have. Now, when we're looking at this in 2021 or in the contemporary era, we're probably saying, well, duh, yeah, that's what acting is. And it's just because that is the turn that our performances have taken now, where realism and naturalism and these things are more or less like second nature. This is what we expect out of performances and out of preparation for performances. So Stanislavski himself was always experimenting and formulating and reformulating and taking notes and going into rehearsals and directing and working with actors, working with playwrights. And every time he worked and reworked, he would take notes about it. So his ideas changed over the course of his career up until the point when he died quite a lot. So there were some ideas that he had in the beginning that he thought were great, and later on he said, that's not quite the way. So all of it was based on his observation and his practice, his actual practice as a theorist. He was not just coming out with these things out of thin air. He was actually seeing how these things produce performances and how they work in rehearsals. So his ideas kind of shifted a lot over time. But what we're going to look at now are some of the key principles of his method. Even though they shifted a bit over time, some of the things remain fundamentally the same. So we're going to look first of all at the key principles of his acting method, and a little bit later in the lesson, we're going to look at his prescriptions for how we should use characterization and how we should engage in text analysis. But for now, let's look at the acting aspect of it. So the first one is imagination. And of course, there are many of these principles, but we're looking at the ones that we are asked to look at in the CAPE syllabus. So according to Stanislavski, the better your imagination, the better whatever you create as an actor, right? So the actor has to imagine that whatever is happening is real. They have to suspend disbelief in order to treat the circumstances as they are real and they are true. So we might be doing a play about Anansi, and we know that there's no actual shape-shifting Spider-Man kind of God thing, but we allow ourselves to believe that it is true and treat the character of Anansi and treat all of his situations and his struggles and his triumphs as true, so that they come across on stage as though they are true and real, and we allow ourselves to have that connection to the audience. So this also involves being a good mako. So being able to observe not just the people around you, but observe yourself, observe how you're feeling, observe the other actors, the other performers you're working with, observe your surroundings on a day-to-day basis, observe people in their natural, everyday quotidian lives and things like that. And basically, Stanislavski is saying the more fertile, the more childlike, the more wild, the more open your imagination, the more interesting choices you will be able to make in performance as an actor. So next up, we have concentration and relaxation, which is also one of those fundamental principles that Stanislavski really strongly believed in. And he was concerned that, and all of these things that he is prescribing, is because he noticed things about performances and he said, that doesn't sit right with me. I'm going to try to correct it. I'm going to try to figure out how we can get around this. So one of the things he noticed was that actors would get distracted by the audience. I mean, who wouldn't, right? You have a huge group of people watching you and waiting for you to do something great. And he found that actors often got distracted by the fact that people were watching them. And he also believed that when your body is tense, when your mind is tense, it stops you from being able to perform at your best. And therefore, when you are relatively relaxed, so not relaxed to the point where you're falling asleep and you're lackadaisical, but when there is ease in your acting, ease in your movement, and ease in the way that you think, that is when actors perform at their best. So he didn't think that it was possible for you to forget that the audience was there. You must know that the audience is there, and it is not possible or useful for you to try to convince yourself that they're not there. But what he did prescribe is that the actor should be able to isolate themselves in a sense of way, to find something to focus on, find a point of concentration on stage, whether it's an object, whether it's a person, whether it's eye contact, whether it's, whatever it is, to make sure that they sort of create a point of concentration, so that they won't get distracted by the audience and they won't allow that tension to bleed into their performance. So another one that we are looking at is emotional memory. Now, as the name suggests, emotional memory is where you have memory of your emotions. So this is where the actor is asked to remember a past experience that they personally had in real life that is similar to whatever the actor is facing. So of course, if the actor is facing heartbreak, then you might ask the actor, think about a time when you felt heartbroken. If the actor is rejoicing, they having a congratulatory moment, the director might ask you, okay, think about a time when you did something you were really proud of or something that you had to celebrate. And in taking that, you are drawing off of your own personal experiences, which of course you would have felt and you would have remembered, and it would be ingrained in your memory, and you're feeding it back into the characterization process. So you can give your real life emotions and feed that into the character and produce a more natural, a more realistic portrayal, because you know what it feels like to have experienced heartbreak or to rejoice, and so you will portray that with your character. So it's about bringing back those feelings, and also creating new ones if you need to. Of course, this can be a bit dangerous, a bit damaging sometimes, because sometimes we have things that happen in life that may be a little bit traumatic that we don't necessarily want to open up those wounds. So it is something that we have to be very careful about if we're focusing on triggering events of our personal past. Another one, a very big one, is the magic if. Now, Stanislavski did not believe, and this is contrary to popular belief because the method was sort of taken and warped into all sorts of different things. There are different things that you'll hear about method acting. But he didn't believe that it was possible for you to convince yourself that what is happening on stage is reality. You know that you're on stage, you know that you're performing, you know that you're a character, and you know that this is a story world. So he said, don't try to make yourself believe that you are actually a Nancy. But instead, you should ask yourself the question, what would I do if I were in this situation? If this was real life, if I were a Nancy and I was in this situation, what would I do? And that's the big premise of the magic if. Asking yourself this question, and this combines your emotional memory actually with your imagination, because you're remembering situations that may have been similar. You said, I may not have experienced this exact thing before, but I experienced something similar. And when I experienced that, this is what happened. So you don't just impersonate the character, but you also think like them, and you allow them to think like you, right? So you put yourself in the character's shoes, and then your motivation becomes the character's motivation. And very crucial here is the do. What would I do? What action would you take? Just not what you would think, but what action would you take? Because, of course, theater performances are all about actions and action. So the final acting principle that we are looking at according to the Cape Performing Arts syllabus with Stanislavski's method is sensory memory, which is quite similar to emotional memory. But in this case, instead of just trying to remember how you felt in terms of did I feel happy, sad, angry, or whatever, we are also engaging with our five senses. So when I felt happy that time, what was I smelling when I was on a drive to the beach? Or that time when I went to my favorite place, how did it smell? And things like that. So you're not just remembering the emotion, but also your physical capabilities, your physical sensibilities that will attach to it. So just as a reminder, just in case anybody has forgotten, your five senses are taste, touch, smell, hearing, and sight. So what did I see when this happened? What did I hear when it happened? What did I smell? What did I touch? What did I taste when I experienced these things in my past? And of course, taking those things, for instance, if you have to portray a scene where the actor is feeling really cold, but the room where you're really performing is very warm, how does that translate into your body, and how do you translate that into your performance? So now on a separate topic, but very related topic on the CAPE syllabus, we're looking at characterization and text analysis and what Stanislavski tells us about these things so that we can infuse them into our performances. So essentially, he is saying that the actor must first understand the super objective, which is the overriding idea in the play that all general motivation derives from. Then that will help us to understand the subtext, which is not the things that are written in the lines or in the stage directions, but that are underneath. When somebody tells you to read in between the lines, what about the character that we know that they don't overtly say, but that we can gain from understanding how they interact with other people, what they say, and what is said about them? And then the things that are overtly said, which is what the playwright gives us, or what we give ourselves in the given circumstances. Now the objective and motivation. With the objective, quite straightforward. It asks, what is the character trying to achieve at a given moment? Motivation then asks, what is the reason for the character to be doing what they are doing? The super objective, which is linked to the objective, is the primary goal that the character wants to achieve throughout. So unlike the short-term objectives, the super objective influences and guides everything that the character does throughout the entire course of the play. So if we think of the example of Snow White, which I probably shouldn't use because I'm not that familiar with the example, but the stepmother or the evil witch or whoever she was, we might think, okay, her super objective was to have rule over the kingdom. But in the moment when she gave Snow White the apple, her objective in that very moment was to get rid of Snow White. But that is still guided by her super objective. It's not that she wants to get rid of Snow White just because. It's because Snow White would have been preventing her from having the kingdom. So her motivation then in that instance, why is she giving her an apple? Because an apple is something that people would normally eat, and she probably wouldn't question it. She would just think that it's anything else and take it unwittingly and fall into a slumber. So again, that is what we're talking about in terms of objective, motivation, and super objective. Obstacle now, another Stanislavski principle, very straightforward. The obstacle is whatever or whoever is preventing the character from achieving their objectives. And we all meet these in life, and every drama needs an obstacle or a conflict in order to make it go forward. If we don't have obstacles, if we don't have conflict, we'll have no story, really and truly. And then finally, we're talking about beats and units of action. Now, this one is a bit tricky to explain, so I'm actually going to attach a link to a document that helps you to identify how to separate a script into beats and units of action, but I'm still going to try to explain it here. And just reminding you that all of these principles that we're covering in this section are pertaining to actually picking apart a script. When you sit down and you sit with your pencil and you write and you make notes and you separate it as an actor, these are the things that we're talking about. So Stanislavski said that in as much as a script is separated into acts, into scenes, into whatever, the actor's script should then be separated into smaller sections, which he calls units of action. So an action is a portion of a scene that contains one objective for an actor. This can be as long as a page, it could be a single line, it could be just a physical action, but usually it's several lines of text. And of course, this would depend on the script, this would depend on the character, and at the beginning of each unit, a character will have an objective that they need to achieve, and when they achieve it, that marks the end of the unit. So for instance, if my character's objective is to calm down another character, that's the beginning of the unit, where the opposing character then gets worked up. So then I speak to her for a little while, and then she calms down. That marks the end of that unit and the beginning of another unit. The next unit may be where that character enrages me, and then my objective is to hurt that character's feelings. That will be the beginning of another unit, and when I achieve that objective, that will be the end of that unit. And of course, whether it is actually achieved, or how long it takes you to achieve, the character to achieve that objective, will be down to the strength of the obstacle, and the strength of the other characters. So if I have a very stubborn character who is going to take a long while to be calmed down, that's going to be a longer unit, as opposed to if it's a really straightforward character who's just willing to listen, then that would be a pretty short unit. So as I said, a new unit begins when the character's objective changes. Then units are further subdivided into beats, and beats are the smallest units that comprise a script. A beat itself contains a distinct beginning, middle, and end, and this is where you have these simple objectives, these small things. If it's to open a can of Coke or whatever the case is, that is what we're talking about in terms of beats. But as I said, it's a little bit complicated to really demonstrate to you, so I am going to send a link where you can see a bit of a worksheet about beats and units of action. So that is it for today. Just a bit of an introduction to Stanislavski. This is a guy who some people study for years and years and years and still don't understand everything that he says. But we are just taking the basics of it and trying to use it in Form 6 Performing Arts. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you in the next lesson.